Hi everyone. Pinnacle just got done with their 20th anniversary Kickstarter, which brought to Savage Worlds what they now call the Player's Book. And this went along with the 5th printing of the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition SWADE rule set. So if you're asking yourself, what's the difference between the Player's Book and the SWADE core book? Well, you've come to the right place. Hi everyone, it's Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. We'd love you to like, subscribe, comment, support us, do all that good stuff. It's all right down there in the bubbles, and you can check that out. So what do I want to talk about? Well, I want to talk about what's the differences between the Player's Book, which is a new book that Pinnacle just is releasing, part of this 20th anniversary Kickstarter, and what's in SWADE, the core book that we all know and love, the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition core book. So first off, there's not a lot, but we'll talk about that a little bit. So what did I look at though? I looked at the version 1 of the Player's Guide. I'll make that mistake a lot of times, guide versus book, but they call it Player's Book. So I looked at V1 of that versus the 5th printing of the Savage Worlds core book, which is the latest. The 5th printing is the latest book from the SWADE core. And so I looked at it, and there's not a lot of difference. There's very little, actually, and it's all subtractions. There's not any new additions into players' books. Like, there's not a new players section that talks about hints and tips on playing the game or role-playing or something that wasn't in the SWADE book as a start. And they also don't have anything that would have been really cool, like a jump start, maybe a couple of pages in the player's book that gives the core mechanics, everything you sort of need to know the basis. It really is SWADE just pruned down to get rid of some of the things that might only be more interesting to a game master. So the layouts are almost identical. There's where they removed a couple of things in the middle of the book. That's made pages flow a little differently than the main book, but for the most part, the page layout's identical. All the graphics are identical. I didn't find any differences as far as images that were in the book or illustrations or what have you. So very similar. That's kind of the crux of it, but let me go into what's specific because that's why you're here, right? So the first section that kind of got removed is around page 18 in SWADE, which is the section on making ancestries or races. That whole section's been removed. All you have now is in the character creation part is, picking your ancestry or your race and then going through those other steps. They removed that whole section from the book. Now, that came out as kind of a whole, so that didn't change the layout. The layouts continued to go on consistently after that point. Interesting, though, they kept the small sidebar on creating skills and why you might create skills, which feels like kind of a game master type thing that they left in to the player's book, which is on page 26 of the player's book. When you get into the kind of the mechanics of it, the next thing that I noticed was changed or different was dramatic tasks. So for dramatic tasks, they removed several paragraphs that talk about how the GM would set up the scenario and how they might run the scenario. What's really there is now kind of a paragraph that talks about how the players interact with a dramatic task and not how a game master might set it up as far as difficulty and what it means to run a multi-person versus a single person. All that GM stuff is kind of changed. They removed the rule of 3 call out that was also in the book. So dramatic task, that's page 113 in the player's book is where you'll see that differences. So they also removed the rule of 3 call out, which was in SWADE, page 128. And this is where it talks about, 3 minutes without water or 3 minutes without air, 3 minutes without water, or 3 days without water. I don't remember what the rule of 3 is, but it removed it. Now, what's interesting is because they removed that, with the paragraphs they removed from the dramatic task, that all evened out, and then they got back to being identical books again, as far as layout and everything. So for a little bit, things were kind of slid around, but then it got to be identical once they got to that removing the rule of 3. The next part is kind of a big part. They remove all the details for the setting rules from SWADE, which starts in the SWADE book at 136. I'm talking the details. So they leave a couple paragraphs in that talk about there's things called setting rules that add flavor and make the game interesting or what have you. So those couple of paragraphs are there, but all the details as to, what are these all these setting rules mean and how do you run them and what's mechanically about them, that's kind of gone. What's kept, though, is they do kept the checklist. They keep the checklist in the book as far as that little checklist that talks about the different settings and kind of what they mean. So that's really useful for players if they're trying to understand what's there and what's not there. But the whole big description of all those setting rules removed from the book. In the power section I looked through, and the power stuff all looks identical. Identical based on the 5th printing. So if you got a previous printing, there's a lot of powers that have changed, but with respect to the 5th, powers look exactly the same. Things are pretty consistent there. So that goes with the layout of the book and the graphics and everything being basically identical. The last thing then is they remove the bestiary and they remove the Game Master section. Okay, no big surprise there for a player's book that they removed the monsters and they removed the GM section. So that's short video because that's it. So the player's guide or the player's book, interesting, might be good for players, but honestly, the things that were removed, you might as well just get SWADE for your players. Maybe it's probably a little more expensive, I'm guessing, but it's got everything in it, and they're not missing out on anything. Like I said, it would have been cool if there was an extended player section that maybe replaced the GM section, or a couple of pages that really set the rules up for someone who's brand new. You could just hand them the book, and they could read the first chapter and be ready to rock and roll and not have to know much else. I have a video on my channel that's like teaching Savage Worlds in 5 minutes, the core rules in 5 minutes. So I know you can do it with very little information. So player's book, great book. Love the covers. There's a bunch of covers, different covers that were available in the Kickstarter, and they're all gorgeous. So I love the covers. Great material. Probably would be good for someone that you don't want to confuse with all those extra details, or you do want to hide the bestiary and don't let them see it. Yeah, you could give them this book. But there's not a bunch of differences that would make it that, hey, I need this book and I need that book. If you got SWADE, you really aren't going to need the player's book. And if you got players with the player's book, unless they're game mastering, they won't need the SWADE book. So you don't necessarily need both. So that's it. That is the difference between the player's book and the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition core rulebook. And that's it. So I'm Carl again with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. We'd love your support, and like, subscribe, do all that good stuff that YouTube guys like. So anyway, talk to you later. Bye.